Chapter 13. When Elizabeth began reading the letter, she felt a strong prejudice against everything Darcy might say. She felt angry when she read his account of the Netherfield ball. He expressed no regret, and his style was proud and rude. But when she read his account of Mr. Wickham, she felt first astonishment and horror, and did not want to believe Darcy's words. When she read it again, however, she realized that his story was true, and that she had been fooled by Wickham. She remembered her meetings with Wickham, and suddenly everything seemed different. Wickham had boasted to her that he had no fear of meeting Darcy, but immediately afterwards he went to London to avoid seeing him at the Netherfield ball. He had told her that he did not wish to expose Darcy because of his respect for his father. But as soon as Darcy had left for London, he had no reservations about attacking Darcy's character publicly in Hertfordshire. She realized that Darcy had never behaved unjustly, even if his manners were proud. She also recognized that he was highly thought of by his friends, and that he had always been very kind to his sister. Elizabeth realized that she had been prejudiced and felt utterly ashamed of herself. I thought I was such a good judge of character, but because of my vanity, I have been fooled by a bad man and distrusted a good one. I was not even blinded by love. I have simply been vain and stupid. Again, she read the part about Jane. On the second reading, her feelings were different. Darcy had not believed that Jane was in love with Bingley, but perhaps this was natural. Even her good friend Charlotte Lucas had mentioned that Jane should not keep her feelings so well hidden. It was even more painful when she read about her family. She could not deny that her mother and younger sisters had behaved improperly at the Netherfield ball, and felt completely depressed. It seemed to Elizabeth that her family were truly to blame for Jane's disappointment by Bingley. Chapter 14. Darcy and Fitzwilliam left Rosings the next day, and soon afterwards Elizabeth and Maria also left for London, where they met Jane, and then returned with her to Longbourn. Lydia and Kitty had not changed. They were still as frivolous as ever. They talked about nothing, and lamented because the officers were soon leaving Meryton. They wanted to follow the soldiers to Brighton for the summer, and their mother also wished to go, but Mr. Bennet refused to take them. When she had a chance to talk to Jane alone, Elizabeth told her about Darcy, his proposal, and his letter, although she was careful not to mention the part about Mr. Bingley. Jane was astonished by the news. They debated whether or not they should expose Mr. Wickham, but decided against it, since he would soon be leaving anyway. When the officers were about to leave, the young Bennet girls were so miserable they could not eat or sleep. Their mother was no better, as she remembered experiencing similar grief in her youth. However, Lydia then received an invitation to go to Brighton from Mrs. Foster, the young wife of one of the officers, with whom she had recently become friendly. She flew around the house, laughing and talking, without a care for Kitty, who was even more depressed because she had not been invited. Elizabeth thought it was a bad idea for Lydia to go to Brighton, and worried that her behaviour there would bring shame on their family. However, Mr. Bennet would not forbid it. "Do not worry. You and Jane will always be respected, even if you have 3 very silly sisters. Colonel Forster is a sensible man. He will keep her out of trouble. In Brighton, Lydia will learn that there are many more women out there who are of greater interest to the officers." Lydia left, and wrote only short, infrequent letters containing no significant information. About a month after her departure, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner came to visit, and invited Elizabeth to go to Derbyshire with them for 3 weeks. They would stay for a week in Lambton, where Mrs. Gardiner had lived in her youth. The town was only 5 miles away from Mr. Darcy's Pemberley estate. Mrs. Gardiner, who of course knew nothing of Darcy's proposal to Elizabeth, suggested they visit. Elizabeth felt apprehensive about the possibility of meeting Mr. Darcy again, but was told by a maid in her hotel that the master was currently away, and so agreed to go with the Gardiners to Pemberley.